It's time to get out of web design because most web designers are looking in the same places for inspiration. And while knowledge of industry standards is essential for the professional, if you want to be original, then you need to seek insights elsewhere. I'm going to share 3 creative disciplines for you to explore, extracting design principles from each and considering how they might apply to the web. What we can learn from these different areas and different mediums. The first creative discipline that we're going to look at is photography, and obviously this is closely related to design because they're both visual mediums, but it's amazing how the principles carry over, and looking at a new discipline, with fresh eyes will just help you see things in a new way. And let's start by looking at this photograph by Richard Avedon. It's 75 years old, but can still teach us a lot. Look at the design principles that are on play. Contrast. The foreground is dark where the background is light. Scale. The foreground subject is dramatically large in the frame compared to the background, even though we know that this tower in the background is huge compared to our subject. Depth. There's this sense of layers here. So we have the foreground, which is dark and in focus. The back is light and it's blurry. There's a depth of field there. It feels like layers going back within the image. Focal point. We're drawn down towards the subject, to that shoe in the bottom left. This is highlighted by the composition. If I had this grid here, we can see that the rule of thirds is in play, and the ankle, that hinge point on the leg as our eyes drawn to, is right there on that left third and that lower third. Suitability. The photographer has placed the subject in Paris with the Eiffel Tower in shot. We know it's Paris. It works for fashion. It's a fashion capital. It's the right kind of environment for this kind of shot. And just the whole elegance, of the piece really works with this kind of subjects. If we were trying to photograph, nuts and bolts for a trade catalogue of a builder's merchant, this probably wouldn't be the approach you would go for. And it's amazing how all these principles are things that we can bring into our web designs. Contrast is so important. Adding interest to our compositions with use of scale and depth and making sure it's suitable for the brand that we're working on. And I'd encourage you with photography, not just to look at classic photos and listen to lectures like this, but actually grab a camera and go out there and figure things out. Or even if you've just got your phone, when you're taking a snap, think about the composition. Think about how you're framing that shot. Think about how the light is hitting your subject, the colors that are in use, all these different photography principles. And that will just help train your eye to become a better art director when you're looking at designs. And also selecting photography for the websites that you're designing. Music is perhaps a less obvious example because web design is primarily visual, whereas music is audio. But there's a lot to learn here as well. Think about the first few seconds of a song. It sets the mood. The song you're listening to is maybe in a certain genre. You know that it's hip hop, and that might put you in a very different mood from ambient orchestral music, which be different again to jazz or to metal. And similarly with websites, in those first few seconds when somebody encounters a site, you should be setting a certain mood. Everything shouldn't feel the same, but it should feel appropriate. Think about these 3 briefs and think about what they would maybe look like in your mind, or even just some descriptive words of the kind of mood that this would give rise to. So number 1, a commercial window cleaning company in Dubai that specializes in skyscrapers. What does that look like? What does that feel like? Probably very different from a cosy country pub restaurant in the Highlands of Scotland where customers gather around fireplaces, surrounded by oil paintings and tartan cushions. Are you feeling a bit cozier now? How would that translate into your web design? Or number 3, an avant-garde French film producer's personal website. All 3 of those would give rise to a different mood, and that's the same thing in music, and it's something that hits us instantly and maybe lets us know whether this music is for us or not. You should be letting your user know whether this website's for them, what they're looking for right at that moment. And there's so much depth to music that we could pick up on. Think of the textures in music. there's all different instruments that can be used, but you need to make sure those instruments work together and there's a cohesive sound. So we want those different instruments, those different textures. If we only had a bass drum, we wouldn't be able to make perhaps very tuneful music with that one note. But by having the whole drum kit and all the different instruments, these are our building blocks, our things to work with, to mix together in a harmonious way. And the same on the web. You want to bring in, different elements to add texture, to add, dynamics. So in music, you have your lower notes, your higher notes, you have your louder sounds and your quieter sounds. On the web, that might be something which is contrasted or dark or large. Then you might have things that are light, where there's more white space, where there's small scale. And it's those contrasts and those differences that bring in. And listening to a piece of music might feel you inspired. And if you're a visual thinker, you start to dream up, how things could look. Even with things like songwriting, there's a journey, there's a flow to the song. So you start off with an introduction that gives a sense of the mood of the song, but then we move through different sections. There might be a verse, a pre-chorus, a chorus, a middle eight section. These different sections sometimes repeat. Same on the web, you might have sections to your site that repeat, but you don't want it the same all the way through. You want to lead people on a journey, to open the thing up and move towards some sort of crescendo, or have some sort of repeating sections for familiarity. And so this video is just all about giving you little ideas, just giving you little pointers of the way you might want to think as a creative person. If you're pushing yourself to be more creative, you have to start thinking a little bit more abstractly and a little bit more artistically, and that's how music could help. I mean, let's have a look at a couple of websites and see if some of these principles are things that we can maybe see on the site. This site for Patter's collaboration with Tommy Hilfiger is a celebration of hip-hop culture, and straight away we have that mood setting that's going on. The type of design that's used, these real world style textural elements like the tape and the bits of grain and the hand drawn lines over the top, and the photographs, the subjects that are used, the way they're shot in like a street photography style is giving us that street level kind of feel to the image. And again, it's like the different elements in music, when they're used together, certain combinations, they suggest a certain genre. And here we're getting that too, because we've got New York City, we've got hip hop, we've got that kind of 90s throwback sort of feel going on, and that's consistent all the way through everything from the textures it used to the grid on the photography. And we've got some different styles of photography, like sometimes the people are cut out, sometimes it's a full width, sometimes they're rectangular, and all these different elements are working together, and they're like different instruments that are combining in a mix, and we have the story evolving as well as we scroll through, and it begins to develop that sense of dynamic as well, because we've got this huge sense of scale, huge type, small type, like the loud quiet dynamics in a song. And it can work on a totally different looking site, like this site here. Now totally different, very clean. We don't have that dirt and texture, but we've got these clean lines going on here. We've got a different sort of color palette here. It goes sort of orange all the way over to blue. We're not seeing sort of yellows and green. There's a bit of green coming in here, and these gradients, these circles. We've got this sans serif type here, this grotesque that makes it look very modernist, business-like, and it's a creative business event, and we've got that intersection of creativity and business. It's not too corporate, it's not too cold, but it is still professional, and they've tread that line very, very well, and again created their own set of ingredients like the circles, like this particular font that have come together to create the feel of this website. And again, we've got this scale here as we move through large type, small type, the use of the grid There's a suggestive element. So it just shows you how these sort of principles and ideas are things that are in our mind, and we don't need to copy this website to produce that effect, but we can apply these principles to our own work and our own creations. Advertising has always had to communicate quickly, but now everybody does, especially online. So following advertising's lead, especially when it comes to things like heroes section, where you want to grab the user's attention, you want to share your offer with them, is a really smart move. Advertising is known for razor sharp copy. It's about really dialing that in. These classic adverts. Let me read these headlines in case you're reading a translation or they're a little bit small, but the one on the left, we're pushing leotards. And it's that idea of injecting a little bit of wit and a little bit of humor is always a good plan. The famous Think Small campaign for Volkswagen in the middle, or on the right. We built the Rolex Explorer because there isn't any watch repair shop on the top of the Matterhorn. So if you're able to have, a line, a headline that is just crafted, that's sharp, it doesn't have to be funny, but it's well crafted. There's no extra words, anything extraneous that doesn't need to be there. Rip it out, edit it mercilessly, and have that really sharp copy throughout your site, because people aren't going to hang around to read something long unless you grab them, unless you draw them in, and then you can unfold your story more from that point. Advertisers also know how to maximize the power of imagery. If you flick through a nice fashion magazine, you're going to see those adverts where the photographs are beautifully shot and they're very alluring, and that's what advertisers know how to do. They pull you into something, and the images are retouched, and the images are well composed, and they know how to maximize that to create the most enticing image possible. And that's what we should be doing on the web. Think about if you're in that sort of category, like let's look at something like furniture, like designer furniture. Like on Artek's website, we have just the stool, a very basic form, but it's just dramatically shot in huge scale. It's well lit, evenly lit. The foreground is very sharply in focus, and we just have a little blur as we get to that back edge. And then we've got this scale, and we've got a clever line, razor sharp copy. Stool 60 turns 90. With these other examples, we just focus on beautiful lifestyle imagery. Everything's there that we need to access, but the large thing we want to see is presenting that lifestyle. You can do that also with something like video. It's not just having this chair in the middle of a factory, but it's having it in situ so the customer can imagine the scenario that they're going to be in. This is what advertisers know how to do. But if you come to web design from a different space, it's about being aware of these things and being able to do something for your clients which is similarly enticing. And one more from Henge is very similar to the last site in that we've got a rolling video of the products, and the products are beautifully shot again, and we've got this interesting as the light moves across them. There's a consistent art direction across this video, but again, it's creating something that's desirable. It's very tactile. We're on a flat, glossy screen, but you feel like you can touch these textures that are on the screen right now. They've created something enticing. They're maximizing the power of imagery. The big thing about advertising, which is really smart, is that they start with the idea. And if you want to do something that is truly creative, then the best design, like the best advertising, it's driven by the creative. It's led by a strong creative concept. It's the idea that illuminates everything else. In examples like these, on the right, we have this knife that won't rust. On the left, this British Airways campaign was actually a smart campaign that actually figured out the actual flights that were traveling above this digital billboard, and it could show them there. And that technology and smarts was paired with the innocence of a child looking up to the sky, pointing out planes, and the wonder of flying is part of the campaign at the same time as their technological innovation. And once they thought of this idea, then the rest of the campaign did itself. It wasn't, difficult to figure out the layout or something like that, but because the idea is illuminating these things, and the idea is what's behind it. If you want to produce something original, leadership must ensure that the project is creative driven with use of technical skills rather than technical driven with use of creative skills. So if you're wondering how does this all help you with the mobile menu that you're designing in Figma right now, that's not the point. This isn't just in time inspiration, something to copy. It's about being a deeper thinker, a more creative operator. It's a long-term play. Just last week I was working in another studio and the creative director referenced Wabi Sabi. Now it just so happens that I'm reading a book on Japanese culture at the moment, so I knew what he was getting at, but I didn't know that was going to happen when I picked up the book. Get out of web design and bring all of your interest, knowledge and experience to your work if you want to distinguish yourself. Until next time, happy designing.